The zip tie bit into Colonel Damaris O.C. Wakefield's wrist like a punishment, and the man who put it there was already laughing. He hadn't even asked her name yet. That detail would haunt Deputy Sheriff Colt Reiner for the rest of his life. The fact that he never once asked her name. It was a Wednesday morning in late October, the kind of morning that makes rural Mississippi look like a painting. The sky was the color of old pewter, the trees stripped down to their bones, and the two-lane highway running through Pigeon Bluff smelled of wood smoke and wet clay. Colonel Damaris O.C. Wakefield had been driving for 3 hours. She wasn't in uniform. She was wearing a charcoal wool coat, dark slacks, and low heels, the kind of outfit a woman wears when she has already given her morning to dignity. Her hair was pulled back severely, the way she wore it on deployment, because old habits are armor. She was driving a navy blue Cadillac CT6, a lease she paid for herself. And she was doing exactly 62 miles per hour on a 65 zone because she did not trust the speed limit signs in Pigeon Bluff. She had driven through towns like this before. She knew what they looked like from the inside of a car that didn't belong. The brown and tan cruiser materialized from behind a highway billboard for a personal injury attorney. The lights came on before the cruiser even finished pulling out of the gravel cutout. No radar gun, no hesitation. The deputy had already made his decision before he clocked her speed. Damaris exhaled slowly through her nose. She signaled. She checked her mirrors. She pulled over. She placed both hands on the top of the steering wheel before the cruiser even came to a complete stop behind her. Deputy Colt Reiner was 31 years old and had been with the Pigeon Bluff Sheriff's Department for 4 years, which was long enough to learn the unwritten rules of the county and not long enough to understand why those rules were wrong. He was not a cruel man in the way that documentaries portray cruel men. He was something more mundane and more dangerous. A man who had never once been seriously wrong and knew it. He approached the Cadillac from the rear quarter the way he'd been taught, his thumb resting on the snap of his holster out of habit rather than necessity. He did not greet her. "Lice, registration, and proof of insurance," he said, leaning into the window frame. "Good morning, Deputy," Damaris said. Her voice was even, measured, the voice of a woman who had briefed 3-star generals on logistics under live fire. "May I ask the reason for the stop?" Reiner's jaw tightened. People who asked that question in Pigeon Bluff were usually trouble. "You were weaving." Damaris looked at him steadily. She had not been weaving. Her hands had not left 10 and 2 for the past 40 miles. "I'll reach into the center console for my registration. My license is in my coat pocket." "I'll move, slowly." I said license first. She produced it. He took it, glanced at it, and handed it back with the particular carelessness of someone who has decided the paperwork is a formality. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." "Deputy, I've provided my identification. I haven't been informed of any violation. I'd prefer to." "Step out, now." The way he said now carried something extra in it, a frequency below the words. Damaris recognized it. She had heard it in Baghdad from a contractor who outranked her on paper and thought that mattered. She had heard it from a general's aide who didn't know her clearance level was 3 tiers above his. She recognized the sound of a man deciding she was smaller than she was. She opened the door. She was 5'8", but the way she unfolded herself from that car added 3 inches. She stood on the gravel shoulder of Highway 14 with her hands visible, her coat perfectly still in the October wind, and looked at Deputy Reiner with the expression she normally reserved for budget reviews where someone had tried to hide a line item. "Turn around. Hands on the vehicle." "On what grounds?" "I smell marijuana." There was no marijuana. The car smelled of the coffee she'd finished 90 minutes ago and the cedar air freshener she kept behind the driver's seat because her son had given it to her and she couldn't bring herself to remove it. Her son, Captain First Class Jerome O.C. Wakefield, had given it to her from a market in Okinawa 6 months before his unit was redeployed to a base she was not permitted to name. The cedar air freshener was a small cedar block carved into the shape of a pine tree, and it hung from the rearview mirror, and it smelled nothing like marijuana. Damaris placed her hands on the roof. Reiner called it in car, asked for backup, and then began to walk the perimeter of her vehicle with the slow, theatrical authority of a man performing for an audience only he could see. He peered through the rear window. His flashlight swept across the back seat. It landed on the garment bag hanging from the hook above the passenger side rear door. The bag was unzipped at the top. The shoulder of a military dress uniform was visible through the gap, dark green, with the gold braid of a senior officer catching the flashlight beam. "What's in the bag?" "My uniform." Reiner straightened up. He looked at her over the roof of the car. Then he looked back at the bag, then at her. The math he was doing was visible on his face, and it was the wrong math. That a costume. Damaris felt something go very cold inside her chest. It was not anger, not yet. It was something older and more precise. The recognition of a door closing. "That is a United States Army Service uniform, Deputy. I am Colonel Damaris O.C. Wakefield, assigned to the Pentagon's Joint Logistics Directorate. My credentials are in the glove compartment." Reiner laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh. That was almost worse. It was the laugh of someone who genuinely did not believe what he was hearing. "You got a uniform and a Cadillac and credentials in the glove box." He looked down the empty highway. "On a Wednesday morning. In Pigeon Bluff. I'm passing through on my way to Columbus Air Force Base. I have a briefing at 1300 hours, right?" He reached for his radio. "Hargrove. You close? I got something on 14. The second cruiser arrived in under 3 minutes. Deputy Marcus Hargrove was older, heavier, and moved with the confidence of someone who had been doing this long enough that it had calcified into certainty. He took one look at Damaris, one look at the Cadillac, and one look at Reiner, and nodded in a way that communicated a whole conversation without a word being spoken. "What do we have?" "Possible DUI. She's got a bag in the back. She says is a military uniform. Claims to be a colonel." Hargrove looked at Damaris. "You got ID for that?" "My credentials are in the glove compartment. If you'll allow me to retrieve them." "I'll retrieve them," Reiner said, pulling on a latex glove with a snap that was meant to sound official. "You do not have my consent to search the vehicle." "Got probable cause, ma'am." The smell of a controlled substance. He opened the passenger door. He went through the glove compartment with the systematic disinterest of someone who had done this many times and found what they expected to find, which was nothing. He pulled out the registration. He found the credentials, a Defense Department ID in its leather case, a military identification card with a holographic seal, a Pentagon access badge with a security tier marking that neither deputy would have recognized if it had been drawn in neon on the asphalt. Reiner turned the credential case over in his hand. He held the DoD ID up to the grey morning light. "This is a good fake," he said. "It is not a fake. I've seen these. You can order them online. There's a whole industry." Damaris looked at him with the particular stillness she had perfected over 31 years of being the only woman in the room, the only black officer at the table, the only person whose credentials were treated as a hypothesis rather than a fact. "Deputy Reiner," she said quietly, "I need you to understand something. Every second you continue this stop without verification is a second that will be examined by people who do not forgive procedural error." Hargrove spat onto the gravel. "She's resisting." "I have not moved," Damaris said. "Mentally resisting," Hargrove said, as if that were a legal category. They zip-tied her wrists behind her back, not handcuffs. Zip ties, the kind used when you don't plan on keeping someone long, but want them to feel the implication of it. The plastic bit into the skin above her radial bone. She did not make a sound. She had trained junior officers in survival, evasion, resistance, and escape for 3 years at Fort Bragg. She had sat across from men in rooms far more frightening than a Mississippi highway shoulder. She breathed through her nose. She counted backwards from 100 in Arabic, a trick she'd learned in Mosul. They put her in the back of Hargrove's cruiser. They towed the Cadillac. They drove 20 minutes south to the Pigeon Bluff Sheriff's Department, a low brick building that sat between a dollar store and an abandoned feed supply depot, and they brought her in through the front entrance rather than the side door, because Hargrove had made a calculation about audience. The front desk officer was a woman named Terry, who had been with the department for 11 years, and who looked up from her computer screen when Damaris was walked in, and then looked away quickly, the way people do when they've seen something they know is wrong, but don't have the rank to say so. Suspected DUI, resisting, possibly a fraudulent federal ID, Reiner announced to no one in particular. Terry said nothing. She began typing. They took Damaris's photograph. They took her fingerprints. She stared into the camera with an expression that was later described by a journalist as the face of someone who has already won and is simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. They put her in a holding room, not a cell, technically, but a room with a locked door and no windows, and a folding chair bolted to the floor, and they told her she could make one phone call after processing was complete. Processing took 45 minutes. She used the time the way she always used forced downtime. She ran logistics in her head. She thought about the briefing she was missing. She thought about the data packet on her secure tablet, locked in the center console of her Cadillac, which was currently sitting in an impound lot. She thought about the chain of command. She thought about who would notice first when she didn't arrive. She thought about her son's cedar air freshener and the way the flashlight had caught it, and whether Reiner had even registered what it was. When Terry finally opened the door and handed her a cordless phone, Damaris did not call a lawyer. She did not call her daughter in Chicago. She dialed from memory, a number she had memorized the same week she received her current assignment, because her commanding general had told her on the first day, "If you are ever in a situation where the uniform doesn't protect you, this number will." The line rang once. Joint Logistics Directorate, secure line, identify. This is Colonel Damaris O.C. Wakefield. Authentication November Golf 77 Alpha. I need an immediate patch to General Harriet Sowell's office. Priority 1. There was a pause of approximately 4 seconds. Colonel Wakefield. Stand by. Terry, who had been pretending to review paperwork at the far end of the booking desk, went very still. Deputy Hargrove, who had been leaning against the doorframe eating a sleeve of crackers, stopped chewing. The line clicked. A woman's voice came through, clipped and immediate. Damaris, you missed the pre-brief. Where are you? General Sowell, Damaris said, loudly and clearly. I am currently being held by the Pigeon Bluff Sheriff's Department in Mississippi. I was detained during a traffic stop approximately 90 minutes ago. I have been zip-tied, transported without consent, and my vehicle and Pentagon credentials have been seized. My secure tablet is in the impounded vehicle. The silence that followed lasted 3 seconds. General Harriet Sowell, 2 Stars Logistics Command, the woman who had rebuilt the Army's supply chain doctrine after Fallujah, did not waste words on shock. Give me the name of the ranking officer at that facility. I believe it's Sheriff Dale Vance. Does anyone at that department understand what a J6 clearance is? I don't believe so, General. They're about to. A sound in the background, a chair rolling back, a door opening. Then more distant, get me the JAG duty officer and the Mississippi National Guard adjutant. Now. And somebody call the FBI field office in Jackson. Back on the line, Damaris. Do not let them touch that vehicle. Do not let anyone handle the tablet. Stay on this line. Hargrove had taken 2 steps toward Damaris. He stopped. Terry put down her coffee mug very carefully, the way you put something down when you realize your hands might be shaking. What? Reiner said from the hallway. Is a J6 clearance? Nobody answered him. The phone was still connected when they heard it. Not the thumping of helicopters this time, but something in some ways more precise. The sound of multiple vehicles moving fast on a small town street, tires on asphalt, doors, boots. The front windows of the Pigeon Bluff Sheriff's Department showed the parking lot filling with vehicles that had no decals, no rack lights, nothing that identified them except the way they moved, purposeful, coordinated, the geometry of people who have done this professionally. The front door opened. 4 people entered. 2 wore the blue windbreakers of the FBI. 1 wore the duty uniform of the Mississippi National Guard, with the rank of lieutenant colonel on the collar. The 4th was a woman in civilian clothes carrying a soft-sided briefcase, and the ID badge, clipped to her lapel, bore the eagle and shield seal of the Inspector General of the Army. The woman with the briefcase looked at Terry. I need the ranking officer in this building, the incident report for this morning's detention, and the impound ticket for a Navy Cadillac CT6. In that order. Terry was already standing up. Sheriff Dale Vance arrived 7 minutes later, tucking in his shirt as he came through the back door. And the expression on his face cycled through 3 distinct phases in the span of about 10 seconds. Authority, confusion, and then something closer to a physical sensation of falling. He was a large man who had run Pigeon Bluff for 16 years and had never once had a morning that looked like this one. He saw Damaris standing in the middle of his booking room, the red marks of the zip ties still visible on her wrists, a National Guard officer to her left, and an Army IG investigator to her right. Who, Vance said, is responsible for this? That's precisely the question we're here to answer, the IG investigator said. They cut the remaining zip tie from Damaris's wrist. The sound of the scissors was very small in the room. Damaris rubbed her wrist. She looked at Sheriff Vance. She did not speak. She had learned long ago that there are moments silence is the most effective sentence in the room. Vance turned to Hargrove. Hargrove looked at Reiner. Reiner looked at the floor. The FBI agents had already separated them. The interrogation of Deputy Colt Reiner happened in the department's own interview room, at the same table where he had sat across from people he had brought in off Highway 14. He didn't look as large in the chair as he usually did. "Walk me through the stop," the FBI agent said. "I observed the vehicle weaving. Your dash cam shows no weaving." Reiner blinked. "The cam malfunctioned. The cam is functioning correctly. We pulled the footage. I smelled marijuana. The K9 unit that swept the vehicle found nothing. The vehicle is clean." Another pause. Longer this time. Reiner said finally. "We have a profile," Reiner said finally. "Expensive car, out-of-county plates, a loan go. We've been doing it for years. An administrative fee," the agent repeated. "It's how the department funds." Reiner stopped. He had heard the way that sentence sounded as it was leaving his mouth and had tried to stop it too late. "Go ahead," the agent said. In the adjacent room, Deputy Hargrove had already asked for an attorney. Sheriff Vance was on the phone with his own lawyer when the IG investigator found the department's ledger in the unlocked filing cabinet behind the front desk. It was not hidden. It had never needed to be hidden, because until this particular Wednesday morning, no one had ever come looking. The ledger detailed 4 years of what the department had internally called highway revenue, fines collected and never processed, impound fees that never reached the county account, cash amounts written in pencil next to initials. The total, when the FBI accountant tallied it 3 weeks later, was $2.3 million, taken from nearly 600 motorists who had driven through Pigeon Bluff and been selected, with remarkable consistency, by the make of their vehicle and the color of their skin. Damaris had been stop number 581. The difference between her and the 580 before her was the number she had memorized on her first day of assignment. She gave her statement to the IG investigator in the sheriff's own office, sitting in the sheriff's own chair, because the investigator had quietly suggested it, and Damaris had quietly accepted. She spoke for 40 minutes without consulting notes. She had total recall of the sequence, the exact words, the timestamps she had tracked internally out of habit. When she described the zip tie, she did not flinch or emphasize. She stated it the way she stated everything. Precisely was enough. She asked once about her tablet. "Recovered intact," the investigator said. "Chain of custody documented. The JAG office will certify it." "Good," Damaris said. "I still have a briefing to make." The investigator looked up. "Colonel, it's 1400 hours." "I know. Can someone get my car?" The Cadillac was returned to her at 3:15 p.m. The cedar air freshener, the coffee cup was still in the cup holder. The garment bag with her uniform was still in the back seat, undisturbed by anyone who had understood what they were looking at. Damaris drove to Columbus Air Force Base. She arrived 4 hours late. She gave her briefing. The general she was briefing had already been informed of the morning's events and said, before she could open her portfolio, "Before we start, are you all right?" "Yes, sir," she said. "I'm sorry for the delay." He looked at her for a long moment. "Don't apologize." She gave the briefing. It ran 2 hours. She did not mention Pigeon Bluff again. There was work to do, and she had always believed that the best answer to people who tried to diminish you was to go be enormous somewhere else. The story did not stay quiet. It rarely does when there are 63 other motorists who had paid administrative fees to Pigeon Bluff and now had a phone number to call. The Department of Justice opened a civil rights investigation within 2 weeks. The State Attorney General's office sent its own team the week after that. Journalists who covered policing found the ledger figures and the racial breakdown of the stops, and the racial breakdown was not a surprise to anyone except the people who had been profiting from it. Deputy Colt Reiner was fired 14 days after the incident, pending criminal charges. He was charged under federal statute with deprivation of rights under color of law. He was 28 years old when he accepted a plea agreement. He would be 39 when he walked out. Deputy Marcus Hargrove, who had asked for an attorney and received one and then made the mistake of letting that attorney advise him towards silence rather than cooperation, was charged separately. He did not receive the same consideration. Sheriff Dale Vance was indicted on 12 counts of racketeering, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. His attorney argued that he had been unaware of the specific practices of his deputies. The ledger, which contained his initials on 43 entries, made that argument brief. The department was dissolved by order of the Mississippi state government. Policing duties in Pigeon Bluff were absorbed by the county sheriff's office under a court-mandated oversight agreement that required quarterly reporting to the state attorney general for 5 years. The 600 motorists, or their families in some cases, received restitution from the recovered funds. Some of the checks were small. Some arrived at addresses that had changed, forwarded to people who had moved away from Mississippi years ago and thought they had left that particular memory behind. Several families reported that the checks were the first time anyone official had acknowledged that something had been done to them. One woman, reached by phone by a reporter, said, "I just want to know who else had to go through that before somebody finally stopped them." The answer was 580. Colonel Damaris O.C. Wakefield was not in Pigeon Bluff for any of the official proceedings. She was in Qatar, then in Germany, then back at the Pentagon, doing the work she had always been doing. The work that required a clearance Colt Reiner had never heard of, and a phone number he had never imagined existed. She received a commendation from her commanding general that was placed in her file, and that she did not discuss publicly. She did not give interviews. She answered one email from a journalist with 2 sentences. "I was doing my job that morning. The system is supposed to work. We should keep building it until it does." There is a footnote to this story that doesn't make the headlines, but belongs in the accounting. 3 months after the incident, a man pulled into a rest stop on Highway 14, just north of where Damaris had been pulled over. He sat in his car for a long time before getting out. He was an older man, maybe 60, wearing a flannel shirt and clean work boots, and he walked to the picnic table at the edge of the lot and sat down and looked at the tree line. His name was Gerald Reiner. He was Colt's father. He had been a highway patrol officer for 22 years and had retired with a commendation and a firm belief that the job, done right, was one of the most important things a person could do. He had told his son that. He had told him more than once. He sat at that picnic table for 40 minutes. Then he got back in his truck. He drove to the public library in Pigeon Bluff, where the legal aid clinic had been established in the old sheriff's building, and he asked the woman at the front desk if there was someone he could speak to about making a statement. He wanted to go on record, he said, that what his son had done was wrong. He didn't think it would change anything. He didn't think it would help. He just needed someone official to write it down. The woman at the front desk, a paralegal named Sharon, who had been with the clinic since it opened, wrote it down. Some things need to be said even when they don't change anything. Some accountability happens in a federal courtroom, and some happens at a picnic table on a highway, between a man and his own reflection in the windshield. And both kinds are real. Deputy Reiner had stopped a woman he thought he could diminish with a zip tie, and a charge he planned to make disappear by Friday. He had instead stopped a woman who had spent 31 years building a career precisely so that the next woman after her would not have to fight as hard for the same ground. He had not asked her name. He learned it, eventually. Everyone in Pigeon Bluff did. If this story stayed with you, if it made you angry or thoughtful, or reminded you of something you've seen or lived, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit like, subscribe to Echoes of Justice, because these stories don't end when the gavel comes down. They end when enough people refuse to look away.